It was just another cold morning in a small, worn-down neighborhood on the edge of town. The kind of place where hope felt like a luxury, and the people who deserved the most often had the least. Inside a tiny house with peeling paint and a broken mailbox, a young mother was already awake long before the sun. The kitchen was quiet, dimly lit by a single bulb. She moved carefully, not wanting to wake her daughter. There wasn't much in the cupboard, just a half loaf of bread, a few tea bags, and a small jar of jam. Still, she made the best of it, 2 slices of toast, 1 cup of tea. The bread was old, the tea weak, but for her it was enough. Because she had someone to feed, her little girl, her reason to keep going. When the sound of small footsteps echoed from the hallway, she quickly brushed away her tired look and smiled. Her daughter came in, still rubbing her sleepy eyes. The mother knelt down, kissed her forehead, and said softly, "Good morning, sweetheart. Come eat before it gets cold." The little girl smiled back, unaware of the notice taped outside their front door, a white sheet fluttering in the chilly breeze with bold red letters that read, "Rent due." A few minutes later, after her daughter was dressed, the mother stepped outside and froze. She stared at the paper, her chest tightening. The landlord had warned her this would be the last notice. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and whispered to herself, "Just 1 more week. I just need 1 more week." Then she quickly tore the notice down and stuffed it in her coat pocket before her daughter could see it. She forced another smile and said, "Come on, honey, let's get going. Mommy's got work today." As they walked down the street together, the world around them seemed to carry quiet judgment. Neighbors whispered under their breath. "She's late again with rent," one muttered. "Such a sweet woman, shame about her luck," another sighed. The mother kept her head high and kept walking, holding her daughter's hand tightly. She'd learned long ago that people will talk, but life doesn't stop for pity. She wasn't asking for sympathy, just a chance. When she reached the house where she cleaned every morning, she took a deep breath and went inside. She scrubbed floors, polished tables, and wiped down windows until her hands ached. The smell of cleaning spray clung to her clothes. But she never complained. Every dollar mattered. Every shift meant her daughter could eat for another week. By the time she finished work, the sun had already started to set. The air grew cold again, and her body was tired, but her heart still carried warmth. On her way home, she saw her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, struggling with grocery bags on the sidewalk. Without thinking twice, she hurried over and said gently, "Here, let me carry that for you." Mrs. Dalton smiled in relief. "Oh, bless your heart, dear. You've always been such a help." The young mother smiled softly. Even when she had almost nothing, she couldn't walk past someone who needed help. Kindness was all she had left to give, and she gave it freely. That night, after putting her daughter to bed, she sat alone at the small kitchen table, staring at the pile of unpaid bills. The silence was heavy. She folded her hands, closed her eyes, and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for money, not even for comfort, just for strength, 1 more day of strength to keep going. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the window. The clock ticked slowly, and as the night deepened, something in the air seemed to shift, quiet, invisible, but certain. Because what she didn't know was that her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. The next evening, just as the rain returned, there would be a knock on her door. But who could it be? And why would a stranger come looking for her, after all these years? The next evening came with gray clouds and the steady tap of rain against the roof. Inside that small house, the mother sat by the window, mending her daughter's torn school dress by hand. The thread was almost finished, but her patience wasn't. She hummed softly, a tune her husband used to sing, the only comfort left from the life she once had. Her daughter sat nearby on the living room floor, drawing on the last few pages of a worn-out notebook. The crayons were broken, some missing their paper wrappers, but her little hands moved with joy. She didn't notice how tired her mother looked. She only saw love in every glance. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the rain outside. Then came a sound neither of them expected. A knock. It was firm, slow, and echoed through the small home. The mother froze, needle still in hand. For a moment, her heart raced. It was late, too late for visitors. She looked toward the door, uncertain. Another knock, louder this time. Her daughter looked up. "Mommy, who's that?" The mother hesitated. "I don't know, sweetheart. Stay here." She walked to the door, the floorboards creaking under her feet. When she opened it, the sight before her took her by surprise. A man stood there in the rain, mid-40s, dressed in a dark coat, water dripping from his shoulders. He looked refined, maybe even wealthy, but his eyes carried something else, sorrow mixed with purpose. In his hand he held an old, weathered envelope. "Good evening," he said softly. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I'm looking for someone who used to live here a long time ago." She blinked, confused. "Someone who lived here? Well, I've been here for about 3 years. Before that, I don't really know who." He nodded, glancing past her shoulder into the small home. Inside, the little girl peeked from behind the table, her eyes wide but curious. He smiled faintly. "It's raining hard," she said hesitantly. "You should come inside at least to get dry." He paused, surprised by her kindness. "Are you sure? I don't want to trouble you." "You're not," she said. "Come in." He stepped inside carefully, shaking off the rain from his coat. The mother offered him a towel, one of the few clean ones she had left. The room was small and modest, second-hand furniture, faded curtains, and a flickering lamp that barely lit the corners. But there was warmth in it, the kind of warmth money couldn't buy. The man looked around quietly, his gaze landing on the child's drawings scattered on the floor. Flowers, houses, a picture of a woman holding hands with a little girl. His face softened. Something about it seemed to touch a part of him long forgotten. The mother spoke gently, trying to ease the awkward silence. "So, who exactly are you looking for?" He took a deep breath, his voice low. "It's hard to explain. Someone I met many years ago, when my life was in a very different place. I've been trying to find her for a long time." She frowned slightly. "And you think she lived here?" He nodded. "Yes. Or, at least, this is where the address led me." For a moment, they both stood there, the rain still pattering outside. She didn't know what else to say. He looked out the small window, watching the water roll down the glass. Then his eyes fell on the little girl again, drawing happily, humming to herself. He smiled. "She reminds me of someone," he said softly. The mother glanced at her daughter and smiled too. "She's my whole world." The man nodded slowly. "I can see that." For a moment, everything felt still, the sound of the rain, the faint ticking of the clock, the heavy silence between two strangers who somehow felt less like strangers every second. Then he asked quietly, almost hesitantly, "Tell me, did you ever live in the downtown shelter years ago?" Her breath caught. She froze. "The shelter?" He nodded again. "Yes, about 8, maybe 9 years ago." Her voice trembled slightly. "I did. After my husband passed away. I was there for a few months, until I found work and could move here." He lowered his head, and his hands tightened around the envelope. His expression changed, as if he'd just found something he'd been searching for all his life. The mother looked at him, confused. "Why do you ask?" The man looked up, his eyes glassy with emotion. "Because I think we've met before." Her heart began to pound. The room suddenly felt smaller. Who was this man? And what did he mean, they'd met before? The truth was about to come out, but what he was about to reveal would change her life forever. For a long moment, the mother said nothing. She stood there, clutching her hands together, unsure what to feel. The man's words echoed in her head, "I think we've met before." Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching his face. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't think I remember you." The man nodded slowly. "You wouldn't. It was years ago, and back then I didn't look anything like this." He walked closer to the small table and carefully set down the old envelope he'd been holding. The paper was worn, the edges creased, as if it had been carried for a very long time. He took a shaky breath, his eyes glancing toward her daughter who was still quietly coloring in the corner. Then he said softly, "You once lived in the downtown shelter, right after your husband's accident?" She hesitated, then nodded. I was alone back then. I had no family, no money, and no one to turn to. It was the hardest time of my life. He gave a faint, almost pained smile. I know. I was there too. Her eyes widened. You were? He nodded. I was one of the men who stayed in the men's section, a few doors down from the women's dorm. Back then I was lost, completely hopeless. I'd lost everything. My business had failed, my wife had left, and I didn't see a reason to go on. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Until one night, I wandered into the cafeteria after hours, hoping there might be leftovers. And there you were. She frowned slightly, searching her memory. He continued, you had your own tray of food, half a sandwich, a small bowl of soup, barely enough for yourself. But when you saw me standing there, hungry, cold, and ready to give up, you did something I'll never forget. You gave me your meal. You told me, you're going to get through this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but tomorrow can still be better. Her breath hitched. The memory came back slowly. A man sitting alone at a table, shivering, eyes hollow. She had felt sorry for him and shared what little she had. Tears filled her eyes. That was you? He nodded, eyes glistening. It was me. I never forgot that night. I was at my lowest, ready to end everything, but those words, your kindness, they saved me. You gave me hope when I didn't even believe I deserved it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a silver locket, slightly tarnished from time. He opened it and turned it toward her. Inside was a faded picture of her, younger, smiling faintly, taken the very night she volunteered to help at the shelter. Her hand flew to her mouth. Where did you get that? He swallowed hard. After you left the shelter, someone found this near your bunk and gave it to me, thinking I might know you. I kept it for years, as a reminder that even in my darkest hour, someone believed in me. The room fell silent. The mother's eyes welled up with tears, her lips trembling. She didn't remember every face from those days, but she remembered the feeling of wanting to help people who had nothing left. She never thought one small act could matter this much. Her voice broke as she whispered, I had no idea. The man smiled softly, his eyes warm but wet with emotion. You changed my life. I got back on my feet because of you. I started working again, built a small company from the ground up, and I've been searching for you ever since. I wanted to find you, to thank you properly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone should do. He shook his head gently. No, you did what most people wouldn't. And that made all the difference. For the first time in years, the woman felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The stranger she once helped had become a man of success, and he had come back to her door, not by chance, but by fate. Her little girl walked over, curious. Mommy, why are you crying? The mother knelt down, hugging her tightly. Because, sweetheart, sometimes the kindness you give comes back to you in the most beautiful ways. The man smiled, eyes glistening. You're right. And I came back because I want to give something back, something that might change your life, the way you once changed mine. The mother looked at him, stunned. What do you mean? He reached for the envelope on the table and held it out to her. Please, open it. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for it. She could feel her heart pounding. What could possibly be inside? She slowly lifted the flap and looked down, her eyes widening as she saw what was written inside. What she found in that envelope would leave her speechless. The room fell completely silent as the mother looked down at the envelope in her shaking hands. The man watched quietly, his heart heavy with memories and gratitude. She slowly unfolded the letter inside. Her eyes scanned the words, but for a moment, they couldn't seem to process what she was seeing. It was a check, a large one, more money than she had ever seen in her life. And beneath it, a handwritten note in gentle, careful script. Her lips trembled as she read aloud, "For the woman whose kindness gave me back my life, thank you for reminding me what hope looks like. I want to help you rebuild yours." Her hands covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at the man, who was now smiling softly, his own eyes filled with emotion. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" He took a deep breath. "Because when I had nothing, you gave me something money can't buy, humanity. You didn't judge me. You didn't turn away. And that one act, changed everything. I made a promise to myself that if I ever got the chance to repay it, I would." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "This is too much. I can't accept," he interrupted gently, shaking his head. "You can. And you should. Because this isn't charity, it's gratitude." He reached out and handed her another envelope, smaller, sealed in gold paper. "And there's more," he said softly. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter of employment, offering her a stable job at his company. A job that paid fairly with benefits and housing assistance. Her knees nearly gave out as she sat down, overwhelmed. He looked around her small living room, the faded walls, the cracked floor, the little drawings her daughter had made, and then back at her. "You lit my way. Now it's my turn to light yours." The mother could no longer hold back her tears. She stood up and hugged him tightly, sobbing into his shoulder. For a moment, time stood still, two people bound by a kindness that had crossed years and circumstances. Her daughter, who had been watching quietly, finally ran up and wrapped her arms around both of them. "Mommy's angel came back," she said with a little laugh. The man smiled, his voice trembling. "Maybe she was my angel first." For a long while, they stood there, three souls connected by fate, by kindness, by something bigger than all of them. Later that evening, as he prepared to leave, she walked him to the door, still in disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. He smiled. "You already did. Years ago." He paused, glancing at her little girl. "Just promise me one thing, that you'll keep doing what you've always done. Keep being kind, even when life isn't." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I promise." He placed his hat back on and said gently, "Goodbye, and thank you for saving me back when I didn't even know how to save myself." And with that, he stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, the clouds had parted, and the moonlight fell softly on the small house. The same house that, just a day ago, had felt like the end, now felt like the beginning. Inside, the mother sat down on the couch, clutching the letter against her chest. Her daughter climbed into her lap and asked, "Mommy, are we going to be okay now?" She smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. We finally are." What started as a stranger's knock had turned into a miracle, one born not of luck, but of kindness that never died. But this story wasn't over yet, because what she chose to do next would prove that real kindness doesn't stop when life gets better, it grows. Weeks passed, and life in that little house slowly began to change. The once cracked walls now carried the laughter of a child, the smell of warm meals, and a quiet peace that had been missing for so long. The mother had started her new job, not as a cleaner, but as an administrative assistant at the Mann's company. Every morning, she walked through those glass doors with nervous excitement, dressed neatly in clothes she could finally afford. And every day, she worked hard, just as she always had, but this time, she worked with pride instead of fear. Her co-workers adored her gentle spirit. She never forgot where she came from, and she treated everyone, from the janitor to the manager, with the same respect. At home, her daughter was thriving too. She attended a better school now, with new books, new friends, and lunches packed with care. Every afternoon, she would run to her mom after school and shout, "Guess what I learned today?" The house that once felt like a place of struggle was now filled with light, laughter, and hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mother sat on the front porch, sipping tea and watching her daughter draw on the steps. She thought back to everything that had happened, the dark nights, the hopeless mornings, and the knock that had changed it all. She smiled softly to herself, because she knew now that nothing in life happens by accident. That stranger hadn't just appeared at her door, fate had brought him back. And in some strange, beautiful way, it was life's way of saying, "You were never forgotten." The next weekend, she returned to the old downtown shelter, the same one where her story had once fallen apart, and then quietly began again. But this time, she didn't come as someone in need. She came carrying boxes, food, clothes, and blankets. The same people who once stood in line beside her were there still, some faces older, some new. When they saw her, they didn't recognize her at first. But when she started serving plates of food with a warm smile, someone whispered, "Is that her? The woman who used to stay here?" She nodded humbly and said, "Yes, it's me." No spotlight. No speeches. Just a woman paying forward what she once received. A chance, a hand, a little hope. One young mother sitting in the corner, holding her child, looked up at her and asked softly, "Do things ever really get better?" The woman knelt beside her, took her hand, and said with quiet conviction, "Yes, they do. But only if you keep believing, and keep being kind, even when it's hardest." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes told a story of everything she'd survived. As she walked out of the shelter that night, the air was cool, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. She looked up at the sky, the same sky that had watched over her when she was broken, and whispered, "Thank you." Because sometimes, life doesn't repay kindness immediately. Sometimes it takes years. But it always finds a way back, just when you need it most. And that's the beauty of this story. A poor mother gave away her last meal to a man who had nothing, and years later, that same man returned, not just to repay her, but to remind her that no good deed ever goes unnoticed. She found hope again. He found redemption. And together, they proved something powerful: kindness never dies. It always finds its way home. Moral of this story: no act of kindness is ever wasted. Even when life seems unfair, and your good deeds go unnoticed, the universe never forgets. What you give with a pure heart always finds its way back, often when you least expect it. Kindness is not weakness. It's the seed that grows hope, rebuilds lives, and connects strangers in ways we can't always understand. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Tell us in the comments, do you believe that kindness always comes back around? Because here on the Cherished Stories channel, we believe every act of goodness writes its own ending. And remember, we're not just telling stories. We're changing lives.